Joe. Good afternoon and welcome to Charlotte Waters workshop. Today we're going to talk about an upcoming initiative that Charlotte Water is working on called Lead Free CLT. This is about our lead reduction program in Charlotte's drinking water. And to get started, I'd really like to have our director do a couple of minutes, if you would, about um, welcoming everyone to the meeting.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Charles, and I am the director of Charlotte Water. And thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. And hopefully, you'll find this time useful. And of course, we need your input into what we're trying to craft here. So, one of the core missions of Charlotte Water is to provide clean, safe drinking water for our community. And so we all know that there's been a lot of narrative and a lot of regulations around and a lot of publicity around lead in drinking water. And so in our community, we are in the process of developing our program of how we're going to implement the latest revision to the lead and copper rule. And part of that is doing more testing, is having an inventory on private property, private property materials. Is really moving our utility into an area that we just don't normally operate. So our objective is to get input because we want to craft a program that, of course, fits for our community and supports what we've got to do from a regulatory standpoint, but also supports the citizens and businesses and schools and all of the different types of uses of water that we have in our community. So thanks for attending. Thanks in advance for providing input on this most important program for us. But Jennifer, I'm going to punt back to you.
Thank you, Angela. So this presentation, like Angela says, is really about sharing some information and then also trying to get some feedback so that we can talk through as a community what this program is going to mean for Charlotte. So our presentation today, we're going to go through and talk, introduce who's here to share information with you. We're going to talk a little bit about what the lead and copper rule has been in the past and what the revisions are going to mean for the future. Talk a little bit about the water system and drinking water quality. And then we'll go through and talk about what it means to the people on the call and what it might mean to our community, these lead and copper rule revisions, and then answer any questions that you have. And because we are in a virtual setting, I'd ask if you have any questions as we go, put them in the Q&A section of the WebEx chat, and we'll get those answered as we go. And then we'll regroup and go through some final thoughts before we leave our meeting. So with that, Angela introduced herself. She is our director. Also on the call today, we have two of our deputy directors. We have Ron Hargrove, and we also have Jackie Jarrell. Y'all would wave. We also have Mike Viniska, who is the project manager overseeing this entire initiative for Charlotte Water. And of course, my name is Jennifer Frost. I am the public affairs manager here at Charlotte Water. And then we also have Veronica Horvath and Mike Osborne as our consultant. We also have several other representatives from our consultant and our communications consultant on the call as well, who will be here to help support answering any questions that you might have, and of course are supporting this initiative for Charlotte Water as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron and let him talk a little bit about lead and copper and what the rules have meant for Charlotte Water.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So why does lead exposure matter? I guess over time we've learned and been through several initiatives over the last 40 some odd years to reduce lead in common settings, exposures that the public, that we throughout our daily lives may encounter. Back in the 70s, it was unleaded gasoline became um, started. That initiative started. Lead-free paint, getting lead out of the paint that we use in our homes, was banned in 1978. And then a little later on, lead in plumbing fixtures and materials came about through some federal regulations that I'll explain here in a little while. But lead, specifically for drinking water, can expose folks through corrosion and leaching out of the plumbing system. Lead-containing fixtures, materials in the plumbing system, especially with water that is at low pH, can dissolve and break down and thus be soluble and thus be able to be consumed for the public. And so that's why it's really important for us to identify things that may be in the system that have this potential and take measures and steps to prevent it. Lead exposure is especially harmful to children, especially 0 to 6 years old, as their brains are developing. It's been found to be high lead levels in blood have found to be, cause developmental problems and other things. Other folks that may be immunocompromised, pregnant women have much more vulnerability to lead exposure. So we want to do all that we can, and we're regulated on lead to reduce the exposure in the water that folks consume. Next slide. So I'd mentioned the regulations for water, the Safe Drinking Water Act revision in 1986, prohibited use of lead-containing pipes, solder, flux in the plumbing systems, in the distribution, to reduce that amount below less than 8%. And then in 1991, the first lead and copper rule came about that required utility water systems to measure and have a limit about the lead in the drinking water. And this particular rule is unlike most of the other rules that we have. We had to measure, our measurement of our exposure was at the customer's tap. So in 1991, we had to identify certain houses that may have that lead containing solder in their plumbing. So we looked for houses that were either had lead in the distribution system and they were tapped off of those, or that had lead containing solders as that solder ban happened in 86. So we looked for houses in 85, 86, and 87 to target for our sampling. To date, none of that sampling has yielded any lead exposure in our system, and I'll talk about why that may be here in a minute. But in 2014, EPA further reduced the amount of lead in the plumbing systems. It had to be what we call lead free, or less than 0.25% exposure in the materials to lead. And then now we have the lead and copper rule revisions that further make requirements that Mike will get into here in a little while. Next slide. So we've been testing, as I mentioned, since 1991. We tested over 100 houses that were identified at the time. Again, the lead measurement, 90% of our samples had to be below 15 parts per billion of concentration. And to date, we've never had a 90% above any action level And our latest round of sampling did not yield any detects at that 90% level. One of the reasons that we think folks in the Charlotte system are best protected is because of what we do at the treatment plant and how the water is delivered to our customers. We use a corrosion control method. We feed lime to the water, and that lime both increases the pH of the water. It comes out at about 8.5 pH of the plant and is distributed to all the homes. And also that lime develops a calcium carbonate coating on the pipelines that reduce any corrosion potential and lead exposure from that standpoint. We actively replace pipes on the public side that are either galvanized or contain lead solder. I mentioned our corrosion control method that we use at the plant, and we've also tested at schools and other facilities for lead exposure and work with those agencies on trying to reduce the amount of lead in our system and the exposure to the customer. So Jennifer, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. That's a really great summary of the rules that we've been following for many, many years now. And I want to talk a little bit about how lead might get in drinking water, and talk a little bit about our system and how water flows from Charlotte Water to our customers so that we can start talking about what might the level of risk be for a customer when it comes to lead exposure. So to kind of back it up, Charlotte Water has 3 water treatment plants. We get our water from the Catawba River. We have 3 water treatment plants, 1 in Huntersville, 2 on Brookshire Boulevard. And the water that comes from the river goes to these treatment plants. It's treated. Then it moves through our distribution system, which is nearly 5,000 miles. If you put all the pipes end to end, it's about 5,000 miles, or the distance between here and Alaska. So we have a huge distribution system that covers the entire county, which is Charlotte Water Service area. We serve all of Mecklenburg County and actually extend a little bit past our borders. So we're very much a regional utility. And then, so those water mains are out in the roads. They're connecting all of our communities and neighborhoods. And then what connects a customer to those water mains is called a service line. And there's a service line on the public side that connects from the water main to the meter. Then there's the meter, which we use to measure how much water a customer is using. And then there's a service line that goes from the meter into the house. And then, of course, there's the plumbing within the home. What's important to note about this particular diagram is where Charlotte Water's responsibility is and where the homeowner's responsibility. We call this the public side and the private side. And so everything leading up to the meter is considered the public side. So Charlotte Water maintains the treatment plants, we maintain the distribution system, we maintain that public service line, and of course we maintain our meters as well. Everything past the meter is considered private, or the homeowner or the property owner's responsibility. That includes, which is often overlooked, but that also includes the service line from the meter to the home. So a lot of times we think about homeowners' private plumbing as being their only contact with water, but really it starts at the meter and goes all the way from the service line through the home. So when it comes to lead exposure, what we need to do is think, from Charlotte Water's perspective, is think about what is it that we know and what is it that we can control. Well, we know that we can test the water at our water treatment plants. We know that we can test the water through our distribution system all the way up to the meter. And what that testing has shown over the decades is that Charlotte Water does not have lead in our drinking water. So the water that comes and arrives at the meter does not have lead. We have consistently monitored for decades, and all of our testing has been non-detect. So this is really good news. That means that the water that's coming from the river, going through the treatment plant and arriving at the meter is is very, very, very low to none at all risk for lead in our drinking water. So this is great. And all of our compliance testing, all of our drinking water quality monitoring data can be found on Charlotte Water's website if you're ever interested. What you see on the screen here are our water quality monitoring stations. You may see these out and about in our community. We have more than 300 of these, and these are connected to the water system, and this is where we do our water quality monitoring of the system, the pipe system, as water travels to the customer. So these are the things that we know and we can control. We also know that Charlotte Water's water system, as our city is actually really young compared to a lot of the national cities that this rule also applies to. Think about Boston, Philadelphia, a lot of the northeastern cities. They've been around a lot longer. They've expanded a lot faster and a lot sooner than Charlotte Water did, or that Charlotte did. In fact, 64% of our water system was built after the ban of lead in 1986. As you can see from this chart, what this describes is how many linear feet of water system were put in the ground by decade. And you can see that Charlotte exploded as a community in 1990 and 2000. Well, this is great news because the ban on lead in water systems came in 1986 and was further refined in 2014. So this is good news. This also indicates that Charlotte in our community has lower risk than, say, any of the other national programs out there. The other thing that you see on our screen is what we call goosenecks. And this was something that we found mostly was used in 1920s and 1930s. And what a gooseneck is a lead piece, usually about 2 or 3 feet length. And what lead is a lot softer than a lot of the materials that was used in plumbing. So what would happen in the 20s and 30s is as a service line was, as a home was being built, what would happen is between the very rigid water main and the very rigid pipe of the service line, we'd have these flexible 2 to 3 foot connectors called goosenecks that were usually made out of lead. What Charlotte Water has been doing is, as we've discovered these goosenecks in our system, we've been removing them. And we've been doing this for decades as well. So at this time, there are very, very few of these that exist, if any at all. So again, this is also something that indicates that we have very, very low risk for lead in our drinking water. So all this is good news. What we don't know, and I'll say it's because we don't maintain, we don't have information on what's on the private side, right? So we've been maintaining everything up to the meter as a public side. And so we can't be sure what the service line is on the private side, and we can't be sure what the plumbing is inside a home. And private service lines can be made of lead, copper, plastic, galvanized, depending on when they were put in the ground and when the house was built. And so we can estimate what the material might be like depending on the plumbing practices of the time that the house was built. But the truth is that it can be any one of these materials. Because Charlotte Water doesn't know what's on the private side, what we do to also reduce the risk of lead getting in drinking water is we also maintain a corrosion control program. And that's what Ron was talking about a little bit a while ago. This corrosion control program is basically we add an additive to the water, we add lime to the water so that it raises the pH of the water. When the pH of water is slightly higher than neutral, metals don't leach into the water as easily. The higher the pH, the less likely metals like lead and copper are going to leach into the water. So if that water, because of the chemistry of the water, if that water comes in contact with, say, a lead pipe or a lead private service line, because the pH is on the higher side, it's less likely to leach or dissolve lead into the water. So that's something that Charlotte Water has been doing also for decades, is to make sure that our chemistry is is just right, so that if there are materials in the side that we don't know about, the private side, we still have been reducing the risk of lead getting into drinking water. And if you are following national news and you know about Flint, Michigan, this is where Flint, Michigan struggled. This is where their system went. They made decisions that changed their water chemistry and therefore allowed lead to leach. Luckily, Charlotte Water has been very, very consistent for many, many years with the water chemistry. And so this has allowed us to make sure that the risk is very, very low for drinking water, lead to get into drinking water. Yep, just talked about corrosion control measures. So this is one of those reasons why, because we don't know the materials that might be on the private side, we maintain the water chemistry so as to avoid any leaching or dissolving of metals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Vineska, who is the guy who is leading this entire effort for Charlotte Water. And he can tell you a little bit about what's coming up and how this might relate to you in the future.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Vineska. Thank you, Jennifer, for teaming me up there, and thank you, Jennifer and Ron, for providing very well informed background to what has been done in the past, and I'm here to tell you what we have coming up in the future. So in 2021, we had our first real update to the lead and copper rule in 30 years. So as Ron talked about, the initial lead and copper rule came out in 1991. 2021, in response to some of the issues, in response to some of the more ongoing lead issues that some utilities were running into, they try to develop a more proactive approach to lead. So with these 2021 rule revisions, we had a few changes to the original rule. First off was there's going to be an increase in water testing in elementary schools and child cares. And we will start that process in October 2024. So what we'll have to do is we will be testing on a 5-year cycle for every elementary school and every child care within our system. Except for when there is a child care or an elementary school that has been built after the 2014 ban on more extensive lead products, or if they've had their plumbing replaced since that 2014 ban. So we will start working on that. Once we get our plan going, we'll see how many resources we can divide to it. And hopefully we can have a more accelerated plan than a 5-year cycle, and try to take care of elementary school and childcare testing as quickly as possible. And then in doing so, repeating that 5-year cycle until either the elementary school and childcare have removed their plumbing, or until we are advised that the testing is no longer required due to prior testing approvals. So, and a second part of our change is we have to have a public-facing database of what we believe the private and the public service lines are throughout our distribution system. So that's kind of what Jennifer was alluding to. We do not have as much information as we would like to on the private side. We've talked to a few Charlotte Water historians, and we've kind of have a little bit of conversation on what we believe is on our side, but the private side is still up to homeowners and up to some plumbing codes that we have to start to parse through to see where we can find little tidbits of information to help fill in our gaps. But what we're trying to be proactive at is we're going to be using a AI model where we will be able to take assumptions and then go out into the field and start to validate or update some of our assumptions, which is what will be occurring coming up here soon. We'll start our investigation, our field investigations, where we take either pictures taken from the homeowner, or we will be able to have the homeowner's permission to do a vacuum excavation on the private side of the service line and take out a little 1 foot in diameter hole and peek in and see what kind of service or what kind of material the service is on the private side. And in doing so, we will be able to update our model and have a model that can say with certain percent certainty that this service line is either a potential lead service line, a unknown, or it would be a service line that is unlikely to have lead. And then in doing so, once we get that model set up, we will have to have a plan starting in October 2024 on replacements for these lead service lines or these galvanized requiring replacement service lines. And what a galvanized requiring replacement service line is a public, or excuse me, a private service line that was upstream of a public lead service line. So any galvanized steel service line that could have had lead leaching into it from the public side of the service line will have to be deemed requiring replacement, and any lead service line that is either on the private or the public side will be needing, well, I guess it would be just the public side. So anything on our side will be needing replacement, but the service line on the private side will have to be either, well, I'll discuss in a little bit, but the private side will either be at the homeowner's discretion, or there'll be some federal guidelines on how to take care of the private service line. So yeah, next slide, please. So that I kind of alluded to it a little bit. We are conducting our field work to verify the service line materials. That's going to be occurring here in the fall and probably throughout the winter. And then we are beginning our planning for our schools and child care facility testing. We'll start that in October 2024, and continue that through the life of the project. And then also too, in 2024, we'll have our public service, or we'll have our public facing service line material database on our website for people to be able to search for their homes, or search for their child care facility, or search for the elementary school, and be able to figure out what service line is feeding their home, or where their child is having schooling. So we are also, as part of this program, we have to have continuous education to the public, which is what we are taking part in today, and will we be taking part in throughout the project. So when we do enter a neighborhood or a potential home that would have a lead service line, we will be informing the homeowner on what to expect from us, what to expect in the time being before we go there, and what to expect after. So we'll have a continuous communication plan to make sure that homeowners are on board and make sure they understand the exposures of lead, what we're doing to prevent it, and what our plan is going forward. And then, like I mentioned previously, we are awaiting further federal and state guidance on the utility's responsibility for the private service line. So like I mentioned, the private or the homeowner could refuse to take their service line out of service if there is a lead service line or a galvanized requiring replacement. But we want to make sure that the future homeowners are protected. So if someone has a private service line that needs to be replaced, we're awaiting kind of what the federal and the state guidelines would be if the utility needs to step in and take care of it, or help out, or basically be able to provide better assistance for the homeowner in the event that their private service line does need to be replaced. So that's kind of what we have going on. It's we're going through our planning stages, and then October 2024, we should be ready to go as far as our implementation program.
Thanks, Mike. So, working together, we've invited you to this workshop, we've invited you to this conversation, one, so that we can start sharing about the project that Charlotte Water is working on, but we also want to continue to work together. There's a lot of things that we need to understand about how this will impact our community. And so what we're asking folks to do is stay informed, raise awareness, talk about this project. Particularly, it can be scary whenever we're talking about lead, particularly when we talk about lead exposure with children. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're raising awareness of what the risk of lead exposure actually is in Charlotte. And then also provide feedback to Charlotte Water. We're going to have I'll show you in a few minutes, a couple of mechanisms to provide us feedback. We definitely want to hear from our community. We want to hear from our stakeholders. This is one of a few workshops we've done. We've done some with our school school age partners. We've done some with some of the industry partners who are in the building and real estate industry and plumbing industry. But we want to hear from everyone who this might impact. And then we're also looking for collaboration. As Mike said, you know, this is a very complicated inventory that we are going to undertake. We have over 1/3 of a million meters out there, 1/3 of a million customers out there. And so understanding what their private service line materials are is a huge undertaking. And so any information that we can get from partners, stakeholders, homeowners, we're open to receiving that information and that data. And then of course, any historical information too would be really helpful. And then talk a little bit about what you can do and understand what you can do to understand your own risk. So those are some of the ways that we can work together. We're very much interested as Charlotte Water, when we know what we're charged with, we're very interested in hearing how this impacts and what questions that you have. And with that, I'm going to open it up for a few minutes for any Q&A. If you would either use the chat function or the question and answer function to share with us any questions you might have, just as you've been listening to this. Any thoughts? Pause here for people to type if they want. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about maybe some questions for you to think about. What questions you have for us? How might this affect your industry? What resources do you know that could be relevant to this project? Who else should we be contacting? And then how do you think the public will react to this project? How willing do you think the public will be to assisting in the inventory? And then any other questions or concerns you have. And I've seen some input about some stakeholders partnering with partners such as Habitat for Humanity. That's fantastic. And I see a question in our question and answer box here. So at this point, it seems that the private efforts will not begin until 23-24. I'll let Mike answer that question on timeline.
Sure. Well, the efforts that go into investigating the private homeowners service line will be getting started soon, probably before the end of the year. So that effort will begin probably late 2022, and then continue through early 2023. And then as far as private side replacement or private side the service inventory, that might be 2023, 24. At least the replacement will definitely be 2024, but for the public facing private service line database, that might not be until 2023. But we are going to be performing our private side field investigations as soon as by the end of the year. So.
And like we talked about earlier, not every home is going to require an on-site investigation. We're going to do as much as we can with historical records, understanding when the house was built, understanding when the materials were put in the ground, to eliminate some field investigations. We can do some process of elimination to understand that not every house is going to need a field investigation. So we've got that going for us too.
Yep, yep, yeah. We'll be able to extrapolate a small sample size and kind of disperse it over the whole service area. And then as we continue either in our day-to-day functions or continue as we go throughout the project and just a specific project, that service line database will kind of continuously be updating itself. But yeah, like Jennifer was mentioning, not every home has to. It's taking a small sample size and then expanding out and then continuously updating and learning from some of the day-to-day and program related actions that can help or have the service lines be more accurately displayed in our model. So that's right.
As we move through neighborhoods, the idea is that we will, obviously, we will need to be working with individual homeowners when we do field investigation. We also know that we're going to spend time educating entire neighborhoods at a time about this project, talking a little bit about their risk, and talking a little bit about what this inventory means to the community. Any other questions, comments? Okay, another question's come in. How will you determine the private homes and communities where you will extract your first samples? For example, will you begin with some of the oldest communities first? Mike, do you want to take that one or share?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So with our first samples, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to have a balance of extremely old neighborhoods. So what we're looking at is a sample size that has evenly distributed homes in each decade. So right now we're looking at 300 homes that we could potentially gather private side information from. And of those 300, we would have, let's say, 40 homes built in the 1880s, 30 homes built in the 1890s, or 40 homes built in the 1900s, and then take that by decade to decade up until the 1980s, where we know that everything after 1986 is lead free as far as service line goes. So for our first samples, we'll have a little bit of extremely old neighborhoods, but then having a little bit of evenly distributed homes that could span decades all the way up to the 1980s. So it's a little mixed, but yeah, we're trying to take care of any home that could be at risk, and really, like, we are trying to identify homes built before the 1940s, which we could have more of our more exposed areas. So, but also trying to take it all the way up and do our due diligence all the way up into the 1980s.
As you can see from our comments, the age of the home is one of the best predictors of what the materials in the service line are, because plumbing practices have evolved over the years, and so we can look at plumbing standards based on the age of the home and understand what those materials and have a great estimate of what those materials might be. So that's our probably our biggest factor in predicting material underground. These are great questions. You're welcome. I've gotten a few other comments about comment, did you say there are resources to actually perform the work for the private sector? Is that going to be income based? I think perform the work for the private sector. I think that means, um,
The replacement portion, so I think,
it's not clarified in the question. Yes, the replacement portion.
so with the replacement portion of the private side, we are working through we're having continuous conversations with the state on how this will be funded to assist the private side. As of now, we do not have any clarity on income based allowances or income-based funding that would come straight from the state. But we're continuously having that conversation, and it'll be probably something that could be likely. But as of now, we don't not have any affirmative or clarity on assistance for income-based homes that could have service lines. But it's been mentioned that it is part of some of the federal infrastructure bills, so that could be something coming down the line. But right now, the state's kind of gathering more information before they could divide it out to each of their utilities. But once we do, we'll be ready to implement whatever we can to assist our homeowners and our community members. So we'll be able to, I'm sure we'll have a little bit of form of communication to our homeowners or to our community on these opportunities or any information that we do come about. But as of now, there isn't any guidance coming from the federal level or the state. So
Another follow-up question came into that, Mike, and it says, so if you identify potential concerns, will people be required to make changes? I don't know. We've also been talking, I don't know if Jackie and Ron also want to chime in. Mike, I'm not sure that the rule requires changes, but I think we understand as a program that we know that we need to talk about this area of the rule and plan for it.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I don't know that the rule, this is Ron, I don't know that the rule, I think it recommends replacement of private service lines, but it's owned by the property owners. And so I don't know that there's anywhere in the city responsibility that we can require it. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
We are a little bit related to the last question about funding sources. We are working with the state folks that manage those federal funds that get allocated to utilities, and they are targeting lead and copper service line replacements and are developing that program of how they can offer funding to systems to help support those private service line needs as well as the public side. So we are continuing to track that with the North Carolina Division of Water Infrastructure on those in its grant applications, from what I'm understanding, of up to 5 million, I think, is what I've been told. But there's still more news to come on that. And we will be pursuing those as those funds become available.
Yep, and there's a comment about that in the Q&A about ARPA funding does highlight, you're absolutely correct. And like Ron said, as a program, we're aware that we're going to create this inventory, and then what are the next steps from that? And we need to be able to support our community as we generate this information. And so, yes, we are definitely advocating at all levels of government right now to make sure that once we create this inventory, the next steps, we can support the community as we go, which will include guidance, additional information about how to replace properly, understanding your risk, and then of course funding should replacement be desired by the private owner. So, Jackie, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing, I guess, mostly what you were talking about, and also what Ron was talking about. And we've had some experience with some ARPA funding for water bill assistance and understand that we'll have to be sure to really look at what the criteria is in order to be able to help whoever, we're able to help with that as we watch that get developed and provide some input on that. I think that at some point there will be opportunities to give some more input into that process.
Yeah, what we know is that, this rule implementation, as Mike said, is October 24. And of course, we're getting early, right? We're 2 years ahead, but we know that there's a lot of education that's going to be needed. We know that there's a lot of work to be done in order to be ready for implementation in 24 and compliance. But that also means that we're still kind of early with the guidance. We have not received guidance, on every detail of this rule from the state or the federal government. And that also includes our funding support. So things will definitely continue to evolve. We anticipate even learning more in the next couple of months about funding. So these are excellent points and excellent questions. And we've been thinking a little bit about these too, but the fact that you're asking them also helps reinforce that this is something that we know is important to our community. And I think I saw one other question regarding the fourth bullet. Would certainly suggest that you contact houses of faith and neighborhood organizations, coalitions during your public outreach efforts. That's a fantastic point. Thank you for sharing that. We are coming close on time. We still have a few more minutes if there are any other questions, but I'm going to move to the next slide. Talk a little bit about some of the points that we shared. The one thing that I want to get across is that Charlotte Water is a young city, fortunately, compared to some of the other municipalities that are out there that are also going to be complying with this rule. Relatively speaking, most of our development has occurred after 1986, and that is a good thing in this case. Know that Charlotte Water has been taking a proactive approach on lead material replacement for years, and that we've been testing this for decades. We can say confidently that lead is not in the drinking water based on the testing that we have. We are at a non-detect monitoring, but that we understand and that we don't control all the materials straight up to the cup of water that someone is pulling out of their tap. And so we maintain a very consistent corrosion control program so that if there are lead materials out there, we're monitoring and maintaining the chemistry to avoid and reduce that risk as much as possible. Know that this is pretty much a new area for Charlotte Water, having to work on the private side. That has not been our jurisdiction up until this point. And so now creating this inventory is something that is a new area for us. And then also know and understand that Charlotte Water also understands that the health risks for lead are really the greatest for children, and that's of all the risks, that's where we're going to be putting most of our efforts and making sure to avoid any higher risks there. For any other questions, don't see any. Okay, how to stay connected. Charlotte Water has created a lead website called charlottewater.org/lead. Please feel free to share this with anybody. This is also something that we will continue to build out, add more resources to. The more questions we get from the community, we'll put those answers here on the website. Also, you can see on here a QR code. I know that we have thrown a lot of information at you all today. If any time you have other thoughts, any other questions, please, by all means, feel free to scan the QR code on your screen, and it'll take you to a short survey, a form that you can fill out to ask any of your questions or share any information with us. Also, the info@charlottewaterlead.org. that's an email that goes to the majority of people on this call today. And so we'll be happy to answer any questions, take any information. We're very much seeking out additional stakeholders and additional partners as we do this. So any information you can share is very, very welcome. Any other tips or advice, we love to hear it. So those are the best ways to stay connected with us. As we have your email addresses now, so as we develop more information, share more information, we'll be sending that out to y'all as well. We'll take one more quick look here to see if there are any other questions, comments. We really appreciate you being part of today's workshop. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed. There's a comment here about great information. Looking forward to the important effort being implemented. So thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. If there are no other questions or comments, we will wrap this up for today. I look forward to talking to you all again in the future. Okay. Thank you all. Take care.